Welcome back to another episode of the Thunderstock Show, a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. Today's special guest is Harold Horgen. It rhymes with Morgan. Harold, today we're going to talk about business growth and strategy. He's got over 30 years of experience in the tech sector, seasoned consultant and strategist who helps software companies and OEM machine builders adapt and thrive in dynamic and competitive as a service era. Can't wait to talk about all things business growth and tech. Harold, how's it going? What's new in your world?
Hi, Ross. Thanks a lot for having me on your show today. We had a great conversation setting this up, and I really appreciate your approach to business and dealing with people. You've got a great attitude, and so I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I am too. And I'm also looking forward to picking your brain around helping people with go to market and really generating revenue as it relates to tech. I feel like me being one of them, seeing all types of entrepreneurs and startups that are trying to break in on this AI gold rush, right? It feels like the new dot-com bubble. But for
Yeah.
someone who's had 30 years of experience, I would assume lessons have been learned that you're like, I've seen this trick before. You're missing that. What are some of the things that over the decades you've been doing what you've been doing that you picked up that someone who just figured out how to use ChatGPT a year ago might want to know before going to market?
Well, nothing's ever new in terms of business models. So technology might be new, and you're right. You would think that people have learned the lessons from the past. And we went through this with the dot-com bubble, with the SaaS bubble, now it's the AI bubble, and people don't. People make the same mistakes every time we have a new cycle. And so now there's a lot, we're at the top of the famous Gartner hype curve in terms of what people expect AI to do. And then reality will set in and we'll go through the downslope and we'll be in a year or so, we'll be in the trough of disillusionment. Some companies are already there because they're recognizing that what they thought AI was going to do for them, it's not doing, and that there's a lot of promise. And when you just look at the Copilot technologies that are out there, and Copilot was supposed to do everything. Just integrate this into your desktop, and Copilot will make your life very easy. And then people do that, and they find out that, well, no, you actually have to do something with it to make AI usable. It doesn't do anything out of the box. There's a lot of potential, but it's still a technology in the same way cloud technology was a technology. When we went through the big cloud hype cycle, people said, well, I will just move all of our workloads up into the cloud. And so companies were moving everything off of on-prem up to the cloud. And then they found out that there's a lot of workloads that just don't work in the cloud, or we haven't changed our internal infrastructure enough to integrate with what we're doing in the cloud. And so we're not getting the full benefit of it. And then there were security issues and all kinds of issues. So every time there's a new technology, and we see this in certainly in the software sector, but we see this across every business that we've worked with. Business is based on three fundamental principles, and those principles apply to every single business, every single service, every new product and service that comes out there. And the three basic principles are that somebody makes something, somebody sells something, somebody buys something. And I think that whenever new technology comes out, there's a lot of confusion, uncertainty, and dread. How is this going to impact my business? How is it going to disrupt stuff? And if you just sit down and look at, okay, so we have to make something. So what are we going to make? We've been making SaaS software or on-prem software. We're making something, and now we're going to incorporate AI. So what are you going to make? What is that? How you do it as inexpensively as possible without compromising quality, and you need to produce a good product. Okay, so now you have the product, and then now how we're going to sell it. What's the go-to-market strategy going to be? And that's tied very closely to who's going to buy it. And when we sit down with companies, we actually start at that end. So who's going to buy it? So what is the value proposition? What problem are you solving? What's the value proposition? Because then you can identify the types of companies that you should be selling to. A lot of times when new technologies come in, say, well, everyone's going to buy this. No, every industry, every technology goes through the same adoption cycles, the whole product life cycle. And so you can't sell your product to 100% of the market when it's a new technology. So who are the 5 or 10% that are the early adopters? What problems are you solving? And then sell to them. So we always start with what's the value proposition? Who benefits today from that value proposition? And then you work your way back. Say, okay, now we know this is our target market. This is the value proposition. So that helps impact what the pricing is going to be. How big is the problem that you're solving? What's that problem translate to in terms of economic value for your customer? And then you can build out your pricing model based on that. And then you say, okay, so now we have the end user customers, we have the value proposition, we have our pricing. Now, how do we go to market? And the go to market strategy is very much tied to the transaction structure, the complexity, the size. You don't go to market with a $100,000 enterprise solution the same way you would a $30 per user SMB HR solution. And so you have to look at, if it's a Gordon Moore has written, he wrote Crossing the Chasm, a bunch of other really good books, but he defined this really well. And he said that there are three types of solutions that you're selling, and it's based on the price or the value. And in today's dollars, and he wrote the book in the late 1990s, so prices have changed a little bit. But if the technology solution, including the services, everything that's involved, if the customer is paying less than $10,000 all in for that solution, then you can't have a direct sales force. You can't have a channel. There's no margin in it to do that. So you have to have high volume, low touch, automated go to market strategies. If you're selling something for $50,000 to $100,000, then there's enough transaction value that you can have at least inside salespeople. You can have some form of channels where you're sharing the margin, and there are probably going to be services associated with that type of a solution. So those two are fairly clear. What he calls the pricing valley of death are solutions between 10,000 and 50,000. Those solutions are too complex to sell through an automated channel, but they don't generate enough margin to justify having the people involved for a complex sales process. And so when you look at new solutions, we saw this with SaaS. Most of the SaaS solutions that came out initially were either the low price, high volume, or they were squarely in that pricing valley of death. So often they were saying, well, you've been paying $100,000 for your on-premise perpetual license. We could provide that same solution for $30,000 a year. Great. But from a go-to-market perspective, it puts them in that really awkward spot where now you're selling something for $30,000 that solved a $100,000 problem. So you have a complex sales process. You have to explain that solution to the customer. They're probably going to have to integrate that with other back office systems. So the service is involved, but now you're only collecting $30,000. And so when you look at what killed a lot of the SaaS companies was that they were selling a lot of applications, but they weren't generating enough cash to cover the cost of the customer acquisition cost, the deployment of the services, and then providing the ongoing support to the customer. So they were front end loading a lot of the expenses, and then they're getting the revenues over time, especially if they're doing this on a monthly basis. But anyways, so when we sit down with customers, that's one of the things that we focus on is, okay, so now we have the end user value proposition. We know who the target customer is, the ICP, the ideal customer profile. We know what the pricing is. Now let's look at the transaction value, because that will determine what our go-to-market strategy is going to be. And then once you have your go-to-market strategy, then you can look at, okay, how do we scale this out in the most cost-effective way? So long answer to your very short question, but that's one of the lessons that we've learned is that no matter what the technology is, there are going to be fundamentals that apply to the business model. It's what are you going to make? Who's going to sell it? How are you going to sell it? Who's going to buy it? And then you really have to calibrate the go-to-market strategy based on the transaction value and the scale that you can drive.
I'm going to make an analogy to martial arts because I know that you're also someone with as a seasoned martial artist. You have a third-degree black belt, and I believe Hapkido. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been a lifelong martial artist as well. And a couple things to parallel that explanation you had on go-to-market strategy. There was a period of time when the UFC was rising in popularity, and I've been in gyms for a very long time. And you get people that have never trained anything. Maybe they played high school football for a season or two, or they like to play backyard basketball, whatever it is. They're somewhat athletic. They walk in and says, "Hey, I want to be a UFC champion. I think I got what it takes." The first day, without ever training, without ever doing it ever before. And then the coach will go, "Okay, great. I'm going to have you go with this person who's half your size." And they're like, "What?" And then when sparring comes around, they humble them, humiliate them because they've been around for even 2 years, right? Just something mildly experienced. And it's just like, oh, the Dunning-Kruger effect in full
Yeah. Yeah.
cycle within 24 hours.
Yeah.
Uninformed optimism, and then informed pessimism. And then most people don't stick around long enough to get conscious competence or informed optimism, which for some people could take 2 years, 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah.
Heck, I'm probably more peaceful and calm than I've ever been after training martial arts for most of my life, because I know what can happen if it goes wrong. You don't know what somebody knows. And I think with a lot of people that are trying to break into tech that have never done it before, they're just like, I have $1 billion idea. let's go raise
That's
a whole bunch of money.
uh-huh.
And then they're holding the bag with millions of dollars from investor money. And they didn't do what you just said, which was
Yeah,
identify your price point, your position in the market, identify, market testing, like to see what is it really worth, how long could the sales cycle be. And then you have people that are just like, there's a lot higher consequence if you have your dream shattered being a tech entrepreneur who's raised all kinds of money than if you just, still have your day job and want to be a UFC fighter.
yeah, yeah. No. You're absolutely right. And it is a matter of building up your skill sets, like you do in martial arts. You go from white belt to yellow to orange to green, whatever the colors are for different disciplines, and you build up that skill set. With AI, all of a sudden everybody's a black belt at AI. Everybody's got the world's best idea, not realizing that there are probably 10,000 other people that have exactly the same idea and maybe have a better background in technology or in an experience to be able to actually drive that solution to its value. Everyone, when we get these new technologies, people are operating in a vacuum. And they're thinking, oh, wow, I could do this. I can use AI for this specific purpose. And I'm probably the only person in the whole wide world that has exactly that idea. And there are thousands of other people that are doing exactly the same thing in parallel. And by the time you get your solution out there, no, you're a generation behind what someone else has done. But no, you're absolutely right.
And, to piggyback off of that, it's like one of the shortcuts I've found with getting better at skill development, whether that's with business or martial arts, is being in the right gym, the right environment, or having, good training partners that are specific at things that can teach you, how to get better so you can expedite your journey by the shortcuts and mastery of somebody else's. The thing about AI is, like, I had a conversation with someone who I like and I respect, and he goes, "Oh, you're starting, you have an AI automation company. Like, I have this project that's 90% of the way done. It took me about 30 minutes, my first ever application I've done." And I just was like, maybe you're a genius, and I just was never aware that this is something you've worked on for years and years and years in the
Yeah,
background. So my friend and business partner, colleague, who's been doing AI automations with go to market, and like his favorite hobby. I mean, he's been coding. This is what he does when he's not doing his day job or dealing with family. And he takes a look at it. He goes, he's maybe like 5% of the way there. There's a couple hundred hours left before we can get an MVP on what he wants. And it's just like, and my colleague, he doesn't claim to be the world's best. He's just like, look, I'm an expert because I spend 1,000+ hours,
right.
and maybe when I spend
Yeah,
10,000+ hours, I'll be, considered, at some level. But he's like, I'm 10 times away from that, which I think is the
yeah,
informed optimism where he's pretty good. He's, demonstrated a
right.
lot of value. But I don't know. I just thought of that story and needed to share it with you. And it applies to everyone. It's like this line of reasoning should not be a deterrent to not try to learn AI. It should be a motivator to be like, there's a long way for me to go. And for probably everyone that doesn't have experience to go. If you're really interested, get started. Don't waste any time. But just know, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and it is, and it's like martial arts. Success in business is just showing up every day, because you have to grow your talent stack incrementally, and you just get a little bit better, get a little bit better, get a little bit better, get more competitive. Your product gets a little bit better, and it's not where you all of a sudden know you spent 2 weeks and they give you your black belt at the end of 2 weeks, and then go out there and think you can beat the world. And business is the same way.
Yeah. Someone asked me in a business meeting, they're like, you can't see Harold, but I'll show you. I have some goofy looking ears for those of you that have only ever seen me with headphones on. And they're like, "Oh wow, your ears. Did you fight before?" I was like, "Well, I've only been fighting from 7 years old. Now I'm 35, and I've competed about every year since then." They're like, "Oh, I don't want to mess with you." I was like, "Oh, you can. Like, it doesn't really bother me. We're in a business setting, so the
Right.
conversation is much different." But they ask, "Oh, so like, what belt are you in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu?" I said, "Well, I'm a purple belt." They're like, "Oh, that's it? Like, how long have you been training?" "Oh, well, 12 years." "Oh, well, shouldn't you be a black belt?" I was like, "Yeah, but injury, moving, life event." Fell out of passion with it, came back. Oh, well, started a business. It's like it's a journey. Like I'm not done.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
people get a black belt in a couple of years. Good for you. I
Right.
remember before I got into business and had a family, I could train all the time, and I was young
Yeah.
and didn't get injured. So my thing is like if you
Yeah.
play martial arts or business, like it's an infinite game. Like there's not like a time limit or there's not like an end goal. I think it becomes more fun and more realistic
Right.
and more obtainable to eventually get the black belt. But like, look, I'm not ashamed to not be a black belt for training as long as I have. Why? Because I
But
could
that's but
train for
that's
another
but that's
35
but
years.
that's the analogy with but that's the analogy with business, isn't it? That things are going to happen that you don't expect. You get an injury, so you lose a key employee. You go out in the mat, and somebody just kicks the crap out of you because, and then in business, the competitor came out with a better product. So do you give up and say, "Well, gee, that didn't work out for me," or do you come back the next day and you try and improve? And it's the same thing with business. It's just keeping at it.
It's just keeping at it. And I've met people that were Olympic and world champions in wrestling and met people that were UFC fighters and this and that. And there's like always a bigger fish too. Like
Yes.
everyone's playing the same game. Like someone I think is like far and away the best, won all these awards. He got his butt kicked at the Olympics once. He got his butt kicked in college once.
Yeah.
He's still trying to climb and aspire too. Like no one's arrived. Is what
No,
I've
no,
what I've learned.
and if you don't get your butt kicked, you don't improve. If you're only going out on the mat with people you know you can beat, then you're not improving your skill set. And the same thing with business. I mean, if you business that just sit there in their comfort zone and keep doing what they're doing and don't want to take on any challenges, don't want to take on any risks, ultimately, they just stagnate. You don't improve, and then someone's going to come out of left field. You're going to step into a situation that you're simply not prepared for.
And a unique position where you and I sit, where we help businesses really it's synonymous almost with like a martial arts instructor if we're talking about how to go to market and prepare for their first competition. If it's go to market, prepare for your first competition. It's like some of the best coaches I've had have been so honest and so rough, and they're like, oh well, we're telling you the truth because you say this is your goal and we think you can handle the truth and it hurts right now. And the reason it hurts is that it's good because you have some growing to do, like keep
Right.
your hands up or I'm going to keep hitting you in the head. Um, and I'm still like, talk to my old kickboxing coach, talked to him yesterday, long conversation. I've
Yeah.
gotten more concussions from that one person than anybody ever should from a buddy. And we're still great friends. Why?
Yeah.
Because without him kicking my butt, wouldn't have gotten better in fighting, and
Yeah.
you become friends when you have that relationship with a trusted advisor. But it's the people that get discouraged or resentful to their training partners or coaches that become like this obstinate. They don't like the reality they're being presented with, whether that's through business or through martial arts,
Yeah.
and they become resentful. They don't really grow. They don't have the opportunity to grow. And how do you
Yeah.
weed out in business people that have the fixed mindset before you engage?
Well,
That's
you find out very quickly, and that's and you kind of hinted at it in your comment that you have to be tough with them, and you just ask them the straight up questions, and if they shy away from it, they won't answer it, they avoid it, they just want to focus on blue skies and unicorns, and the blind optimism. Then you realize that okay, this is not someone that's going to be successful, and when we work with companies, our favorite companies are where the founders, the one we call the post stumble stage,
mm,
is where they've had that initial burst of optimism, they have their product, and they go out there and they get their teeth kicked in one way or another, and they realize I still got a good product, I just haven't found the way to be successful with it. And then sitting down because if they've been hit a couple of times, then they're much more likely to take the right coaching on, well, how do you avoid being hit next time? Or identify what are those red flags. One of the things that I preach, that I follow and I preach, is the importance of integrity. And I see too many people, especially when they're starting out in business, willing to compromise not necessarily their integrity, but make concessions on working with people that they recognize. They get these little red flags that this guy's probably going to try and find a way to screw me, but I'm going to outsmart them. And what I found is that it's very difficult to outsmart people that are really intent on taking advantage of you. And you're much better off not going into a situation. And same thing, using the martial arts analogy, some people fight dirty, and that's just the way they are. And you're not going to say, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. And they say, oh, yeah, okay, I'll stop. And then you go back out again, and they do exactly the same thing. You can't change that behavior. And in business, especially in the early days, avoiding the temptation, and I made the same mistakes in the early days as well, going into situations where I knew there was an issue of integrity, but I felt that the opportunity was so good that I would take that risk. And it just never works out. just absolutely never works out. Whether it's hiring people, business partners, customers, vendors, to the extent possible, just avoid doing business with anybody that represents that type of risk. It's never going to work out for you. And when you get caught in a situation like that, it ultimately reflects very badly on you as a person and the company that you're trying to build up. And the reputational loss of being involved with an individual, whether it's an employee, vendor, or supplier, that is unscrupulous, the pain and the cost to you as an individual in a company, you never make up for that. And what I've also found is that when you run into a situation like that, because you're always going to run into someone that is, even if you don't recognize the signs, you will run into situations where someone is being unscrupulous, and you just cut it off. And you can't let yourself get aggravated and try and get back at them or grind about it. Just take your losses and move on. Don't really go down into the gutter with these people. Don't go to the extent possible, unless it's really clear cut and really obvious and expensive. Don't go to court with anybody. The distraction and the emotional cycles that you spend on trying to fight your way out of a situation like that, simply not worth it. Just take your losses, move on. There are enough good people in the world to do business with that you can absorb those losses. Just get rid of it as soon as.
Man, that's one of those lessons that you either learn the easy way by listening to your stories, or you learn the hard way and be like, I wish I would have learned that sooner.
I think most people have to learn those types of lessons the hard way. That's really the only way that you change your behavior.
It's like there's like two analogies. One was from, I think it was from Taoism or Buddhism. It's like holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intention to throw
Yeah,
at someone else and hurt them, but you actually burn yourself.
yeah.
And the other one is if you wrestle with pigs, you'll get dirty and they'll enjoy it.
Yes, yeah,
So, yeah, I've spent too much of my career. It's not any isolated thing. There's no recency bias necessarily, but I look back and I'm like, the times where I had the most emotional dissonance and I was just like burning the energy that wasn't productive, right? Like you're spinning your tires or something like that.
yeah,
But emotionally, have been trying to force or push the acknowledgement or affirmation of my value to people that didn't benefit from saying good job or didn't benefit
yeah,
from acknowledging it. For the right customer, everything you do will be appreciated and acknowledged. And for the wrong customer, no matter what you do, you'll never get appreciated or acknowledged. So
yeah,
it's really important to pick who you serve well. And that's why when you talk about going the ICP or the ideal client profile, it's like if you don't have an ICP that you stick to, then you'll just help anyone that says yes to your help. And it ends up being super detrimental. Maybe not in a week, maybe not in a month, maybe not even in a year.
yeah,
But over time, it can do some serious damage, and
yeah.
that is a lesson I've learned.
Yeah, we touched on this in our prep call, and I'm a big believer in what goes around comes around. And you can't you keep in your mind, you keep kind of an informal ledger on, yeah, Ross needed something, I'm going to help him out. So I helped Ross out, but I don't ask for anything in return. Just, Ross is a good guy. He needs some help. I can help him. It doesn't cost me anything. I'm going to give him that help. And then a few months go by, and Ross needs something else, and you get to the point where, well, I'm doing a lot for Ross, and I never get anything back from Ross. But then you say, okay, great, okay, now I recognize. Or I'm not picking on you.
Oh, yeah, it's fine. It's okay.
But the thought is that you find out who the givers and the takers are, and the world works so much better when you don't keep a specific ledger. I did this for that person. That person really needs to reciprocate. You can do that on. My feeling is that I will always help people out on a one-off, a two-off basis, just to help them with their business. Doesn't I'm not going to charge for it, but if I can make their business better, more successful, then at some point they might need me down the road. But if I don't help them today, if I don't help them become better at what they're doing, they will never become a customer. And I think people need to make kind of a positive contribution to other people's business, because ultimately that's going to pay back. There will always be those people that you just never reciprocate. And again, that comes back to the conversation around integrity. And you start to recognize who those people are and say, okay, they're just in it for themselves. They're never giving back. They become a negative influence in your life. And business is all about positivity. You look at most people that are successful in business, they're successful because they're optimistic, they're positive. expect a good outcome. The people that are really negative and pessimistic are not going to be successful. The ones that are really grinding about they were mistreated 2 years ago by this person, and then they're still can't get over that.
Yeah. Yeah. Business
It
requires resilience.
it does. It's a mentality where you just kind of just let go and say, I will charge for my services when there's a specific engagement, a thing that I can do, and I'm driving real benefit for somebody. But it's just part of the general ethos, and it sounds really corny, but if you can make the world a better place, then you're making the world a better place for yourself as well and your family and whoever you're dealing with.
Yeah, I think of it as reciprocal altruism, where it's like
Yeah,
when you do right for others, you're actually doing right for yourself. When you respect others, you respect yourself.
right.
But the inverse, I think, is true too. And I think people that are critical of business and say, "Oh, all wealthy people are greedy and they're bad people." Some of the most giving and kind and good people I met have been quite wealthy because the
Yeah.
more that you give, the more that you get. And if all you do is take, well, then no one's going to want to become available to you, and then doors start to close.
Yes and no. There are lots of examples of individuals and companies that are very mercenary. Take no prisoners. For them, it's a zero-sum game. If someone else is winning, they're losing. And so we've done a lot of channel development, and that's one of the go-to-market strategies that we recommend for a lot of technology companies as a way of getting the multiplier effect. Find good partners and a lot of different types of partners. The model has changed over the years, but there are a lot of different profiles of partners. People that can help open the door to customers, whether or not they complete the transaction. And um, there are some companies that are really focused on channel. So I'll use an example. HP in the old days was very partner centric, very ethical organization, and they had a fantastic partner ecosystem and loyalty. Then Carly Fiorina came in, much more mercenary, and she started allowing her enterprise salespeople to compete with the channel partners on large transactions, where they would channel partner would initiate a large transaction, and then the enterprise salespeople would swoop in and take the deal away from the channel. And yeah, and it within 2 years completely destroyed the faith that the channel partners had in HP as an organization. And there are other companies, and I'm not gonna mention them, but there are other very large companies that have a similar philosophy, and they're very very mercenary. They are they are sociopaths in many ways, and it's all about the. And so there are companies that have been very successful, have grown to be very large by being very ruthless.
Now, I definitely see where you're coming from, and I acknowledge the points you made. I guess the question we have to solve for now is how do we define success? How do we define winning and losing? I've spent, I felt like a lifetime, but it was a period of my career in private equity where I met people that were ultra wealthy, millions and millions of dollars, generational wealth. However, their kids don't talk to them. They've been divorced several times. They don't really have too many friends that they could pick up the phone and call and say, I have a problem. Can I talk to you? And I look at that, I'm like, you might be financially successfully, but like if I'm keeping score, like, I know I have a handful
Yeah,
of buddies.
but that's how some people keep score.
Yeah. So my question is, how do you keep score, Harold? Like what is
Oh,
your definition of
let me,
success
let me,
and
let me
winning?
just well, let's close the loop on that one because it's been proven. It's been proven that a relatively high percentage of successful CEOs of large companies are sociopaths.
Look at the person at the Coldplay concert.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
It's like,
Right,
hey, you just got caught with your head of HR. You both
right,
have families. You just blew up both of your families, and you're probably, you had short term, maybe there's some short term localized
yeah,
benefit to that relationship extramaritally, but long
yeah,
term destruction. It
yeah.
goes back to integrity, like you said.
Yeah, yeah. No,
So
so I measure success in how I've been able to make other companies successful. But that's the service you and I are both providing. And it's not measured just on, well, how much money did I make this quarter, but it's really about the impact that I've had on other companies, other people, and the ability to make them more successful. It is, again, I'm getting a little bit philosophical here, but it's part of our biological makeup that in terms of evolution is that we are mandated as people to leave the world a better place than we came into it. And I think that you apply that to personal relationships, you apply that to business, and then you apply that to what you do with the resources that you've generated from the business. I think, as people, we're hard coded to try and make things better, make it better for us, but also make the environment, not the environment in terms of Greenpeace, but the environment that we're operating in, improve that overall. That's why people, faith-based people that go to church, or people that really support charities, and those are all ways of giving back to society. And I think that if you are really myopically focused on just improving your own financial status with no concern for what's the impact of my improvement in financial status, what impact am I having outside the fact that my bank balance just grew by X, or my stock value just went up by X, then ultimately you just die a miserable person. And if you die a miserable person, back to your question, I think that being able to end your life as being very satisfied with what you've accomplished for you and the people around you would be the measure of success.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very one. I appreciate the philosophical outlook because I think that's a lost skill for some people, is not just to think about, computationally, or think about how to get from point A to point B, but at the end of the day, from A all the way through Z, you know, what does that destination look like? And I think it's important to be reminded of and reflective of that question sometimes. And you're right, the way you've coined it, which was satisfied with your accomplishments. And on the inverse of that, it's like not full of regret for the things that you did do also. It's like, how do you maximize the plus and minimize the downside from your, and it's not just purely emotional, but like your logical state of being, like, I put out more good than I did bad in my definitions, right? I helped more than
Yeah.
I harmed. I gave more than I took ad infinitum.
But that's also based on where you are. So, I mean, someone who's founding a company, I don't know that they can necessarily afford to have that balance where you just have to be hyper focused on building your business. Make sure that you have a successful foundation, but you can still build that foundation on sound principles. Having life work balance when you're driving and you start to get VC funding, can you achieve the level of success that you need for you and your investors, by working 40 hours a day and taking time off for the family and travel and do all of the other things that make you a more rounded individual, go to the gym, make you a better rounded individual? Or is there a phase of life where you have to accept that? But for some people, that just becomes their life. They never break out of that. And at some point, you can get to where you start leveraging. When I started out, one of my weaknesses was I wasn't really good on the details. So I was
Right.
always good at selling engagements and adding value to the customers, but I always felt that I can grow the revenues fast enough that it makes up for some of the mess that I leave behind me operationally. And I didn't bring someone in, and I didn't feel comfortable delegating. So when you see companies that are successful, some are driven by an individual. Michael Dell, an individual. Then he built up a team. Some companies start off with two people that are really complementary. So look at the Hewlett Packard, look at the Apple. There are a lot of companies, really big examples of companies where you had the driver that drove the revenues, and then you had the operations person where they match up very, very well. You're lucky if you can start a company with a partner that complements you and where you have that inside outside skill set. Typically, it's the outside skill set that drives the initial success of the company, and then it's going to be a little bit messy. And then you have to start bringing someone in to clean up the mess and provide that operation, the operational skills necessary. One of the things that I underestimated was the cost of not keeping the operations running as smoothly as they should have, the economic cost of not doing that soon enough.
Yeah.
My feeling was all sins are solved by revenue, which to a certain extent is true. You keep the revenue side of it going, if you're not laying the foundation for a more of a process-driven organization, it's very difficult to scale.
There was a lot of wisdom in that, and I'm going to pick a few points that really stood out, to at least to my experience. Number one, I totally agree that, you mentioned if you're great at bringing in revenue to the door and creating more opportunity, and just expansion through business development, it's imperative, especially when you're starting. I totally get that. But if you don't eventually clean up the mess at some point, that can go back and bite you and almost make all that extra above and beyond effort be had to be allocated towards cleaning the mess eventually, right? So
Yeah.
unsolved issues don't go away, they just grow. So I totally agree there. And on the other side of that, you mentioned that when you're VC funded and when you're startup, you have to make your first rounds to pay back your investors. I think that You kind of put a mirror to my face as to why I felt a certain way about business models. Like, there's all kinds of ways you can, excuse me, you can bootstrap, you can raise capital through VC, you can take on equity partners through private equity. There's all kinds of ways to structure a deal.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with businesses that have done all of that. At least the ones that I'm aware of. I'm sure you can work with a bank, and they all have their pros and cons. But the one thing about VC that I find is that when you accept, let's say, $5 million, right? That's a pretty sizable first round. Well, now you're beholden to individuals that have a certain expectation and a certain timeline. And if you're not sprinting towards the finish line to satisfy that investor base, that becomes your primary objective,
Yeah.
really, is to satisfy your investors,
Yeah.
stakeholder returns. If you take money from a bank, you have certain covenants. So, like
Mhm.
marriage, like don't break your covenants with the bank. If you take on PE partners, you have to certify the term sheet and how that structure goes, which could be little column A, little column B of those analysis. And if you're lucky enough to bootstrap, which is sometimes the most difficult thing to do because you're super constrained on resources, well, then your goal is just to stay alive. Then your
Yeah.
goal is to, you know, eh, not die, right?
Right.
You're not as
Right.
beholden to your capital sources, but I mean, good luck. You have to be effective in your moves to keep playing, or else eventually, you could tip the ship where it's like, hey, maybe burnout is the biggest
Yeah.
fear. So it's like choosing your battle and like which one is the
Yeah.
one that's right for you. And
Yeah.
I know for me, I mean, I think that the highest alignment for me is bootstrapping. I really like that, like working with customers that
Yeah.
are bootstrapped one way or the other, because typically
Right.
that means that it's not their first rodeo. They've
And
made a liquidity event.
yeah, and I agree with that. So let's talk about that liquidity now, because a lot one of the things when I sit down with the smaller company, one of the things that we talk about is so what is your exit? What's your exit strategy? And they usually haven't thought, no, I just want to build a business. Well, why are you building a business? What do you want to do with it? Do you want to sell your company to someone else? Do you want this to be a lifestyle business where you get to a certain level of revenues and then just manage it for the cash flow? Do you want to build this up to be an IPO, which is not really realistic for too many companies? But they say, yeah, with this, yeah, I want someone to buy us. So okay, so then you have to figure out, why would somebody buy you? So what are they buying you for? Are they buying you for your people, for your customers, for your revenues, for your technology? And very rarely over time will someone buy you for your technology, because you built a business with a proven technology. So this is where Google's going to come in and pay you 50 times ARR because you got this really hot technology. So you look at, so what are the other reasons they buy you? Well, they buy you for your customers. They buy you for cash flow. So who are the buyers going to be? Is it going to be a PE firm that wants to buy a stable business with a stable customer base? Is it someone that's just picking up the cash flow and they know they're going to wind the business down, so there's not a lot of value in that? Is it someone that's going to buy you to because you're complementary to what they're doing? And that being complementary can be a lot of different things. It could be that your product is a really good fit with somebody else's portfolio, and they can now build you into their product, and they scale it out by selling you to their existing customers. That's a really good arrangement. Is it complementary because for whatever reason you've built up a really good business base in Albania, and so you now have 30% of the market in Albania that has real value. That one of the things that we really emphasize with our customers is the importance of focus. So especially with technology companies, they, oh, we want to be global. So they end up with this hodgepodge network of partners in 20 different countries. And I say, well, no, you end up with less than 1% market share in 20 different countries, has absolutely no value to someone that's going to buy you. But if you have 20% market share in any geography, it's going to be someone will pay for that. And it doesn't have to be 20% of the UK, it doesn't have to be 20% of a major market, but where you dominate in. Can you find markets where your technology represents a step forward? We worked with a Greek company that had a combination of ERP and CRM. And said you can't sell your product into Western Europe or the United States because everyone who needs an ERP system has an ERP system. So we ended up focusing on, well, but can you go east? So at that time, going into places like Romania, Hungary, those places were still going through the early stages of technology adoption. And so a lot of companies hadn't graduated. They were still using some basic homemade accounting packages. So you look at, so what are the areas of adoption? And so they built up a really nice business and becoming a market leader in Eastern Europe. Now, that had real value to someone. I think the Sage came in and bought them, but they bought them because they had that market position. So when we sit down with companies, I figure out, so why will somebody eventually buy you? And then that becomes your objective, and you work towards that. But if you have this very generic, we're going to grow the business, and without having a clear idea what that value is going to represent for someone else.
Well, no, I was just going to say, starting with the end in mind. If you ask the
Exactly.
question, why are you doing this? It makes it almost any of the obstacles or difficulties much more bearable because you understand where you're going to go. And if you don't have that vision with like, here is the top of the mountain. Right. It's like hiking on a trail versus walking on a treadmill. Well, if you love the walk, walking on a treadmill is fine, but there's no destination. Well, however, if you love walking on a treadmill, you're probably going to love hiking on a trail.
Yeah. And so, some companies come back, and I ran into this with a lot of companies in Canada. So, startups in the U.S., most startups have fire in the belly. They want to grow to become big. In Canada, it's a different mentality. They want to grow the company to be a few $1 million in revenues. They're making a 15-20% margin, and the healthcare is taken care of. The retirement is taken care of. They have a cabin up in Northern Ontario, and they just want a good life. And so we said, great, okay. So now let's look at that. And this is where the magic of compounding interest comes in. So today you're doing $500,000. It's not, you can't sell it. No one's going to buy a company worth $500,000. But if you grow your business by 15% a year on average over 20 years, at the end of 20 years, your business will be worth between $8 and $9 million. So that would be the revenue. Now you're at a revenue level that makes sense for someone to come in and buy you. And so let's have a business plan where we're not going to be the unicorn. We're not going to have that hockey stick, but how do we build a business plan that will grow you by 15 to 20% every year? And if you do that consistently, you'll get to that revenue level. The Scottish have a saying that I love, and it's many a mickle make a muckle.
That's interesting. Yeah. I believe it'd be Scottish.
I
think I get it, but it's
so you add up a lot of little things, then it becomes a big thing. And so it's saving you pennies in effect.
It's like there's no silver bullet. There's 100 golden BBs.
Yeah, I'll give. So one story. This is not technology related, but I've always loved this story. So I'm from Norway originally. We moved to Canada when I was a kid, and moved back to Norway. So I had my grade school and high school in Canada. And when we graduated,
where in Canada, Harold?
London, Ontario.
Okay, I'm familiar. I have a friend that lives there.
Yeah, it's halfway between Windsor, between Detroit and Toronto, in Southwest Ontario. So there's a kid in our class in high school who was a C student, and he said, "I'm never going to go to college. I had no aspirations." But he said, when we graduated, he said, "In 20 years," he said, "I'm going to be one of the wealthiest people in our class." And we just kind of laughed at him. And we went back for the 20th anniversary, and he was worth $5 million. And I said, well, how do you do it? He said, so I got married when I got out of high school. My wife's family lent us $100,000. We bought a motel, 50 room motel for $2 million, $100,000 down, seller financing for the rest of it. We worked our butts off for 20 years. We did the cleaning. Took care of everything. We paid off the loan. At the end of the 20 years, our motel was worth $5 million. They sold the motel. I mean, sometimes it's just the basics. It's just working hard, applying basic principles.
Harold, it's like, how do you make $1 million? Buy something for 9, sell it for 10. You know, it's simple. It's like, oh, it's ridiculously simple, but there's a lot that goes into it.
It is, but it comes back to where we started a conversation, that it's basic principles. There's another joke. This is a joke. It's a story that shows it's not how smart or sophisticated you are, it's how you apply them. So again, this is a story, the Harvard, the guy, Larry in the back, who just kind of got his way through and just barely scraped through, got his degree. And then the 20-year anniversary, 20-year reunion, they come back and Larry shows up in a stretch limo, made all kinds of money. And they said, Larry, how did you do it? And they got these titans of industry and attorneys and doctors, and he was worth more than all of them. And he said, I make this thing in China for $2, and I sell it for $5. And it's amazing how much money you can make with a 3% markup. And it's this where, it's.
I have a family friend that worked in big investments. Like, I forget which it was, whether it was like a Fidelity or a Vanguard or something like that. And she worked, and She worked really hard, saved all of her money, and then towards the end, when it was like close to retirement, I guess at that stage or whatever, there was like a 30-year thing. You got
Uh,
some sort of pension or retirement was fine. I don't remember the event, but she says, "All right, here's my end date." She started a cleaning company. Cleaning company nets twice as much money as working at this high profile like finance job, and she
yeah,
works one half of the time to net twice as much money. It's 4x more valuable than time spent. Now she was grateful for the time and business and whatever. But now I think she has like 400 or 500 homes in a vacation resort area, and like
yeah,
she's basically the cleaning company of like this like beach town.
yeah.
And it's just like that's amazing. And she goes,
Well,
"Oh yeah, it's super seasonal. I make all that money in a season." And I'm like, but like people think like cleaning like this is like, oh, who would want to do that? Boring businesses are kind of where it's at. And to your point about Canada, half of my family is Canadian, so French Canadian, Quebec. My mother grew up in outside of Lake Champlain in
okay,
that whole area. I kind of did like a family reunion probably a year ago. I'm talking to a cousin, and we grew up together, and I always just remembered like they were always like so. The cultural difference was always more like chill and laid back, like family focused, more present. Like when we're there, like not worried about the stress of other shit going on even when I was a teenager. And that she,
yeah,
was a managing partner of essentially like a PE firm that was kind of niched. And she's like, "Oh, I said, "Oh, that's what I did." And, at the time I did that too. Like, "Oh, how big is yours?" "Oh, mine's this." And she was just like, "What?" Like, we were both kind of like, "Oh, we're doing kind of a similar thing." But her goal was so different than mine. Like mine was, yeah, and I'm going to sell to this, and I'm going to go build this. I'm going to do it 10 times bigger, and I'm going to do blah, blah, blah. All this like competitive, like fire in your belly money, like pipe dreams after a couple of glasses of wine. And she goes, "Oh, I just want to have the best product. Just like, I don't really care about all the money. Like, that's cool. But like, I just want everyone to know, like, my product is awesome."
yeah, yes.
And I was just like, "Oh wow, I feel like a jerk. I feel like a rube, I'm like
So
culturally like faux pas. Oh, I guess I shouldn't have tried to
you
be."
felt very American at that point.
We're playing a different game. We're playing a different game.
Yeah,
She's already like she's like in her mind. If I had to look back and reflect on that conversation, it's like she's won and she wants to keep winning.
uh
Whereas like I've never won, even though we were in a comparable situation. It's
yeah,
like, oh wow, that's anyway. I figured you'd at least
yeah.
with your Canadian experience, you'd get a
Yeah.
kick out of that.
But yeah. No, no, no. But, I agree because I started my career in banking, and then we had my wife and we bought our first house, a typical 2,200 square feet, 3 bedroom, 2 bath, quarter acre lot, and we had a Norwegian friend and his wife that came over to visit. Living in Norway, they had a small apartment, and they thought, wow, this is a really big house. I said, we can't. We're looking forward to selling this and buying something bigger. And there was just the two of us, and they said, what? Because the whole mentality was, well, you have to grow. You have to grow, get stuff that's bigger, the next level up, and and they couldn't believe it. So we moved to France in 1990 on what was going to be a 1 year gig with a client, and France people live on a much smaller scale. So the apartment was, I don't know, 1,100 square feet. Some of the furniture that we brought from the U.S. wouldn't fit through the front door. The movers couldn't get the furniture in through the door. Just like the sofa. But we ended up learning to live on a completely different scale. And we were there for 14 years. We ended up being there for 14 years. And at the end of 14 years, my wife said, from a business perspective, we take the lifestyle out of the equation, and we just decide what would be best for the business. Should we stay in France or should we move back to the U.S.? I said, well, if you take the lifestyle out of the equation, it's a no-brainer. You go to the U.S. because in Europe, and the same thing in Canada, they get a different mentality. You can live really well with a reasonable income, and especially in France, where on a Friday, do we go out and check out that new restaurant, or do I bust my butt and try and get an extra client? Well, the restaurant always won, and we refer to living in France as being in a kind of a velvet trap. The lifestyle. We also described it as being three-dimensional rather than two-dimensional. Living in the U.S. was two-dimensional. Everything was based on, is it fast, easy, cheap, convenient? In Europe, nothing is fast, easy, cheap, or convenient. You have to think through everything that you do. You just didn't hop in the car and go to the supermarket. You went to the market, or you went to the different stores, the different shops. You went to the greengrocer, you went to the meat store, you went to the baker, you went to the fish store, all individual, and cheese shop. They were all individual shops. You had to plan out how you're going to shop, who you're going to visit with, and then at each store you end up spending 5 minutes talking to the owner. And so it added a completely different dimension. And so, yeah, back to the story about your cousin, was it up in Quebec?
in
Yeah,
Quebec. Yep.
it's a different. You make a choice, and we didn't realize we had subconsciously made the choice by living in France for so long. And then when my wife sat down, and she loved living in France, just broke her heart when we moved back to the U.S. But from a business perspective, it was the right decision to make. But it's a very clear at that point. It was a very clear decision. Do we stay here where we love our life, or do we move to where we know we can grow the business to the next level?
And the colloquial, I love the velvet trap. I'm going to remember that, and that's going to stick with me. The question is, do we want a velvet trap or golden handcuffs?
Yeah.
Like, pick your poison. There's trade-offs to all things. Is it velvet or gold? And I think people should be really honest with that, because again, it's like, why are you starting the business? What are you solving for? And if you don't
Right.
start with the end in mind, you might fall into the wrong equation, right? Your constraint becomes a different thing.
Yeah.
Maybe you want a velvet trap, but you have golden handcuffs, or vice versa.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's absolutely something I'm going to ponder on. Next, so Harold, I have to ask you, this is one of my favorite parts of the show, by the way. It's called Ask a Question, Leave a Question. So the last guest has a question for you without knowing who you are, and you have a opportunity to ask the guest after you a question about anything without knowing who they are. The question for you, Harold, is how do you know that someone that says they want to collaborate with you is actually going to be a good collaboration partner? Whether that's a customer, whether that is a vendor, supplier, partner, employee, whatever. How do you do the litmus test? We touched on it earlier.
Yeah, yeah. You find out very early in the conversation whether they're making a contribution. Are they a giver, are they a taker, or are they a collaborator? And you find out very early in the conversation. And that applies to whether it's a customer. I turn down engagement with customers that are just going to be pure takers, where there's just no where that is the mentality. I just don't want to be involved with, even if they're successful. I don't want to be involved with that type of a relationship. It's the same thing with employees. One of the things that when I was hiring people, I would try to find people who were collaborative, where they knew what they were doing, but they were willing to share what they were doing with other people in the organization. In every organization, there are always those people that everyone goes to. And it could be Mary in HR, it could be Phil in marketing, but there are those people that are that social nexus within an organization that whenever you have a problem, you can talk to Phil, and Phil, if he can't answer it, he knows who, and he'll network within the organization. And then there are other people that say, no, it's like in a restaurant. They use the restaurant analogy. So in some restaurants, the wait staff are given very assigned tables. These are your five. This is your station. These 5 tables are yours, and you make your tips on that. Other restaurants say, we'll pool the tips, and you just work any table. And you can tell when you go into a restaurant what that mentality is. So I always want to work with people that are not necessarily pooling the tips in terms of getting things that they don't deserve, but the fact that they will collaborate together as a team to increase the value of whatever there is that they're participating in. And whether that is a restaurant, that if they do that, they all make better tips because the customers are happier. In a business, if you have people that are collaborative with your customers, vendors, employees, partners, then it's 2 + 2 is 4 or 5. Sorry, you get more value from those types of relationships.
People, I love that answer. It reminds me of like a Good Samaritan test, which is there's universally like very little downside, but what somebody tends to do is revealing. I used to think there was 2 options, but there's really 3. It's the grocery cart test. It's like once you've taken the grocery cart and unloaded your groceries in your trunk, then what do you do with it? Do you just leave it there, which is like chaotic evil? Like, why would you do that? I mean, it's not harming anything, but like, why? There's people that
Yeah.
will just take it back to the cart. But there's people that say, you're going to the grocery store. Would you like my cart? And you're saying, look for option 3 in that situation. Option 1, obvious no. Option 2, I mean, most people would, you have to be considered a decent Samaritan would do that. Option 3 is, who can I help with this thing that I have? I don't need anymore. Like, it doesn't harm me. So it's like the small things, right? And I think,
Yeah, it is. I'll give you a litmus test that I've used many times, and I've had my clients use it, and it's really revealing. Um, you go to a restaurant with someone that you're going to be, if hiring someone for an important role, or if it's a business partnership that you're entering into, go to a restaurant and have a meal with them. See how they treat the wait staff. Are they? I mean, because that will be a reflection of how they deal with others. So some people are just hard coded that they treat people as subordinates when they feel that they're subordinate to them. and the way they treat wait staff in a restaurant. Some people just have mutual respect. They're doing a great job. I don't care that they are wait staff or a busboy. They're doing a really good job. I respect the fact that they're doing a good job, even though I might be positioning. I might be interviewing for SVP of worldwide sales. And to me, that is a real litmus. And I've had clients that have used that, and they said, we had this perfect candidate, and we went out to lunch, and the guy was a complete asshole in the restaurant. And said, I just don't want someone like that in my company.
Yeah, I love telling potential clients specifically, but anyone that would collaborate with, it's like, hey, we will disagree at some point, and it's the ones that kind of think I'm just joking that are like, oh yeah, sure, and then when we actually disagree, they don't like especially if it's a CEO or someone that always is
Yeah.
surrounded by yes people, and I'm like, hey, I think your idea is bad, and it's not that I think you're dumb or I think you're bad. It's like, here's the reasons why I don't like this idea for this specific outcome, and that can break a relationship. Like that first point of contention where it's like, oh, I'm the gym leader. You can't challenge me or potentially like score a point. That type of relationship never works out. Whereas like
Right.
and the other thing is like if it's like, do they give praise? Like if someone is an entry level person and they do a good
Uh-huh.
job, like do you just like treat them like the whipping boy and like they can do no right and you have to like be tough on them all the time, or do you like say, hey, I acknowledge your good job? It's like, to your point with the wait staff, I think that's great. You
Yeah.
just treat the CEO and the janitor the same way, you know. And
Right.
then what
You ever,
question would you have? No, you finish the thought.
no, you respect the job that people are doing, whatever that job is. And you respect them
Absolutely.
for how they do their job. Do they do the job with integrity? Do they care? Do they have a passion for doing what they're doing, no matter what it is?
Amen. What, Harold, then what question do you have for the next guest without knowing who they are?
Well, I think one of the questions that you had on your platform was a really good one. What would you tell your 8-year-old self or your 80-year-old self? I like that question, and I think that'd be a good question for your next guest as well.
Well, I will be sure that I asked that. Excellent. Well, hey, I appreciate the time spent, Harold. It was a very thoughtful and reflective conversation. Everyone listening, I hope you felt the same way. And if you did, I don't run ads at the show. The only request that I have is to share it with a friend or leave it a review. I love the feedback. It won't hurt my feelings either way. I always want to improve. But until next time, everyone, be well. Thank you, Harold.
Thank you, Russ. Really appreciated the conversation.
And before we sign off, Harold, how can people find you and get in touch if they want to connect and learn more?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/HHORGEN. I was one of the first 25,000 users of LinkedIn, so I've got my identities on there. And my email address, horgen@theyorkgroup.com. Those are the two best ways to get hold of me.
Thank you so much.